most underestimated places on the planet, I think. It's not a World Heritage Site. There are loads of stones. Here are two aerial views of two parts of the Karnak alignments. On the left, the Menek, which is the most westerly part, and then the central part called the Ker Mario alignment. In the Karnak alignments, there are now 3,000, still 3,000 stones standing. But in the area, there are lots of different kinds of alignments, and it's estimated that initially there were about 70,000 standing stones in this area. Okay, so it's there are not only standing stones, there are lots of artificial hills, tumuluses, dolmens, over 250 dolmens, stone circles. It's an incredibly densely populated area, which is very little known, in fact. This is the Kerliscan alignment at equinox sunrise. Another series of alignments called the Petit Menek, which these are open all year round and go through some wooded areas. This is an overview of the Karnak alignments. On the left then, these parts called the Menek, east and west, and then Ker Mario in the central part, and at the top here, up here, the Kerliscan Petit Menek. The whole thing is about 4 kilometers long. The Erdeven alignments here at the left are a bit further north, 8 kilometers north. These were much bigger alignments than Karnak alignments. There were probably 50 rows of stones here, and at the beginning of the 20th century there were still 6,000 stones remaining in these alignments, but they've been heavily destroyed for building and stuff like that. But you still got the east-west orientation. You can see the sunrise and sunset here at equinox. Some very big stones. This one on the left here is 6 meters 50, but the top has been cut off, so it was about 8 meters tall. So there are just thousands of these massive stones made from granite. These are the St. Barb alignments, another series of alignments. These have been incredibly destroyed, but this is what you can see remaining today. This is orientated towards the Minor Moonrise. This is an event I organized at Minor Moon in 2014, and over 500 people turned up to watch this moonrise along these alignments. So we're trying to keep things alive. This is another series of alignments, Saint-Pierre-Quiberon alignments on the peninsula, the Quiberon Peninsula, just nearby. And these alignments actually go into the sea. The sea has come up since then, and there are thousands of stones actually underwater going into the bay, up to over 1 kilometer from the shore. Virtually nobody knows about these. I actually did a tour on these stones with people from the local county council and the tourist office, and I showed them all these stones. Nobody even knew they were there. As you can see, very big stones and very long alignments. So all this is happening in southern Brittany, in the Morbihan, it's called, the Morbihan area. All these yellow lines represent the different alignments I've been talking about, so they're all in a small area. And the ones we're going to concentrate on first are these Karnak alignments. There you go. So this is another view of the Lemenek alignments, 11 rows of stones. Start on a high point of land and then go downhill. This is the aerial photograph of these alignments. And so you can see, I'll be coming into this, there are two major directions in these alignments. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a second. The central part of these alignments, Ker Mario, again, two central directions given by the orientation of the stones. And the southern row of the Ker Mario alignments is aligned towards sunrise at summer solstice or sunset at winter solstice. So this is very specific orientations. Here they are again, these two things from aerial view. Now, what I'm going to show you now is the link between two alignments. According to the official view, none of these alignments have got any links to each other. There are no real official explanation. There's no official explanation of what this is about. But there are no links made, and everything's treated as sort of independent. Now, here on this slide, this should allow me to click to a video. Here we go. So I'm going to show you on this video. This is done with Google Earth, and so here on the left, where the hand is on the right hand side, that's the beginning of the Kerr-Mario alignments, and this is the beginning of the Lemenic alignments. Between the two there's about 1,400 meters, a little less than a mile. And now I'm going to draw a line from the first stone in this row at the Lemenic alignments. You'll see this line is going to be drawn up here, and I'll draw it to the first stone here in the first row of the Kerr-Mario alignments. Dice going from stone to another, and now the angle that comes up here is 71.57 degrees. That's the exact angle from north. This is exact to 100th of a degree, 71.57 degrees. And if we come back to the beginning of the how the line, you can see how this yellow line don't. Okay, so it's quite clear that these lines are linked up. Let's look at the second line now. So I'll put a point on the second row, and then we'll go up to Kerr-Mario. And here we have the first two stones here, and let's link up to those. So you see how these two stones are actually aligned, and if you look at the angle again, here, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, 71.57 degrees again. Exactly the same angle to 100th of a degree. And if we come back to these rows of stones, you see how this line goes through the stones like this. Now, these lines go downhill and then uphill again, and so the actual view of with the change in the slope and everything gives a certain sort of position. Now let's look at the third line. There are three stones at the beginning of this third line which aren't in line with the others. They're east-west. But if again I put a stone, I put the marker on the first stone of that line, and then come up again to the first stone, or the first two stones in the third line at Kerr-Mario, again the angle is 71.57 degrees. Okay, so these three, the first stone in the first three rows of Lemenic to Kerr-Mario all have the exact same angle to 100th of a degree. You see how the line goes through the stones. A bit further up, you know. Here we go. If you go a bit further along the line, see how the rows are going along it. So there seems to be no doubt that these two sites, Kerr-Mario and Lemenic, are linked together. Stop that video. And now let's look at what's happening as far as geometry is concerned. What is this angle of 71.57 degrees from north? If we draw the lines then, we see all these different lines join up, and you get the same width. The alignments at Lemenic are the same width as the alignments at Kerr-Mario, and this angle corresponds exactly to the angle of a triple square. In other words, which is perfectly orientated on cardinal directions. So if you look at this rectangle, you can see is 3 times longer on the east-west line than on the north-south. North-south is 1, east-west 3. And that is if you calculate that angle geometrically, it is exactly 71.57 degrees. So this geometry is precise over a distance of 1,400 meters. It's precise to 1/100th of a degree. So I've been working on this for 30 years, and when I started, I was using maps and measuring angles and things. Only recently, using satellites and laser and stuff like that, it's now possible to get incredibly precise results. And these incredibly precise results are now showing me that the people who built these things were capable of that precision. So we're not talking about sort of amateurs, you know, these sort of first farmers who were sort of looking at the sky and vaguely positioning things. We're talking about extremely precise planning linked to exact cardinal directions, right, to 1/100th of a degree. The diagonal of a triple square, taken from the south, is 18.435, or from the north, 71.565 degrees, 71.57. Now, if we look at the other end of these alignments, I told you there were two angles given by these alignments. So if we look at the other end, we would zoom in on that. This is very complicated, this part. There are lines going in all kinds of directions. It's rather difficult to sort of get a grip. But if you look at the major lines, which we can see at the top here, these are the major lines, the orientation of these blue lines. These are where most of the big stones are, and they're all lined up in the same direction. Now, if we take that angle, first of all, what we notice is that there's an alignment that links up with it along the side of the road. Can you see how the road has changed direction here? Because there's an alignment that goes along there. And if we take the most northern part of this line and link it up to the beginning of the first row here, it's the same angle. So the most northern line of the east part lines up to the first stone in the most southern row of the western part. So there's some other kind of geometry going on here which is crossing over this first geometry. Makes things rather complicated, but let's have a look at what angles that gives. So here we're going to zoom in on the eastern part. You can see these rows of stones, and then goes that back down to the western part where we were before. Now, there are some stones here which you can't actually see because of the bushes, but if you go back, there's a photo from Google Earth in winter where there are no leaves on the trees, so you can see a line of stones there which lead to a point. They lead to this point here. And if we go from this point here up to the first row of these alignments, now these stones here, there are some stones there which have been moved for the building, or which were east-west before. But the first row of stones, you can see how these rows have exactly that angle. And that angle is 64.43 degrees. Now let's do this on the calculator. The inverse tangent of 2, 63.43 degrees. So what this means is that this angle is the angle of a 1/2 square. The inverse tangent of 2, I don't remember trigonometry, but it's 1/2 basically, and that gives you an angle. And let's get rid of this. Predictable detail. So there's very precise geometry going on here, using simple numbers, 1, 2, and 3. Here you've got the measurements of it. I was very interested to discover that there was a standing stone here in the corner. And here's the angle of it, 1/2, that's the angle of the eastern part, gives you the double square. Okay? So that gives you this geometrical plan of this complex, which is a triple square for there you go. And if you use a triple square for one part and a double square for the other, and in fact I discovered that the angle between those two, the average angle, or the angle between those two forms, is a sevenfold square. This is the geometry of it. So the alignments themselves, the major direction of the western part of the alignments follows the sides of this sevenfold square, whereas the major direction of the eastern part follows the diagonal. These lines go down this diagonal, whereas these lines go along the east-west, that go along the major axis of the western part. And this whole thing is positioned in a double square, right? It's very, very precise. It took me about 18 years to understand this. So you haven't got much time. But I spent many, many years sort of studying this, and I knew there was something to be understood here, and it was definitely eluding me. You know, I couldn't understand, and then all of a sudden, it suddenly fitted in. Now, this triple square then, as we can see, goes from the first line of one series to the next series in Care Mario here, from here to here. Now, if we add on the width of the monument, the width of the alignments, the north-south width of the alignments, and I give that a value of 1, a module of 113 meters, I discovered that the measurements involved here, are they going to turn up? Yeah. In fact, the north-south width of the alignments here is 1/4 of the total height of this triple square. So if I put this in whole numbers, I have 1 here, 4 here, and 12 here. Now 4 plus 1 is equal to 5, that's easy enough, which means that if I join the southern part of the most southern line of the western part to the most northern line of Camario, I get a 5, 12, 13 triangle, which is a Pythagoras triangle. And this is precise again to 1/100th of a degree. I don't have time to show you all these relationships in detail because, well, I don't have time, but it's very, very precise relationships. So this is incredible geometry showing the relationship between these shapes. But if I add another module here, now here we have a problem of landscape, because the beginning of the Care-Mario lines and the beginning of the Menec lines are on high parts of land, plateaus, and then the lines go downhill. And this, from here, we go downhill, and this is in a sort of ditch. It's in a low part full of water, and there are no monuments here. But if I draw a line from that spot, from this second added module, if I draw a line from there back to the beginning point here, well, it goes right down the first line of these eastern lines I showed you earlier. So instead of building this here, they've built it here. You can see how this line goes, and that creates a kind of confusion because you have lines going here and lines going here. But in fact, it's linked to the landscape, because all these things are on high bits of land. So somehow they've managed to do this perfect geometry, taking into account the high plateaus of land. Okay? So all these things are on approximately the same level. So that's the double square which is added on. Now if I come back to the Camario alignments, I'd said they're orientated towards summer solstice sunrise. Now here you can see the lines, and they go down to a dolmen here. This is a dolmen in the corner, and this southerly line, you can see this line going down the stones here, straight to this dolmen. And that's orientated towards summer solstice sunrise. It's definitely worth coming to Brittany at summer solstice. That's why we organise an event every year, because there are so many things to see, and this is one of the big things. Of course, it's at 6 o'clock in the morning, but, so the days are quite long. Now, at the other end of these alignments, there's a big stone called the Manio. Here you can see it, much bigger than all the other stones around it. And this is a kind of focal point for these alignments. You can see this yellow line, which goes along the most southerly line we saw earlier, leads straight to this standing stone. Here's the overview, okay? So the most southerly line here you have the line of alignment, and this links up here to this. This is the biggest stone in the whole of these alignments at this end here. Now, if we look at the angle of that line, we see it's 53.13 degrees. Don't know if that means anything to anybody, but that is the exact angle of a 3-4-5 triangle. So these Kermario alignments are linked towards sunrise, summer solstice, but also have precise geometry, which means that this latitude was chosen because of its astrogeometrical properties. The people who did this came to Karnak, because it was at a specific latitude which corresponded to this precise geometry, and this geometry is done by the sun itself. So this takes us into another dimension. See this right angle? Okay. And this is incredibly precise again. We're in sort of very, very precise stuff. For some reason my 3 squares have gone off a bit. But what I later discovered, because I knew about the 3-4-5 triangle, and then I realized that there was a triple square involved in the first part of the alignments. But then what I discovered was that there's a relationship between the triple square and the 3-4-5 triangle, which is a very simple relationship. Is that if I take a triple square, this one's deformed for some reason. I don't know, it was okay this morning. But if you take a triple square and you put one diagonal of that on the east-west line, the other diagonal gives you the 3-4-5 triangle and summer solstice. So a triple square inclined like that, with one diagonal towards equinox, the other diagonal gives you summer solstice. Because if you double the angle of the diagonal of the triple square, which we saw was 18.435 degrees, that gives you 36.87, which is the exact angle of a 3-4-5 triangle. This is not approximate. I've rounded this off to 3 decimal places, but you can do that to 100 decimal places. It's perfectly exact. There's no approximation involved in this. It's a perfectly exact geometrical relationship. Okay? And this can only happen at the latitude of Karnak in Brittany. So this led me to discover, maybe this exists. I have talked to sort of university mathematicians about this, and they say, well, it hasn't really been formulated like this, but we knew it must have existed. Well, anyway, this is the way I formulate it. From any 2 numbers, whole numbers, different, A and B, you can get a root triangle, okay? A, B gives you a triangle. These are with an angle alpha. And this formula here gives you a Pythagoras triangle where the angle is double. So let's look at this at Karnak. B is 1, A is 3. It's the 1 to 3 relationship. And that gives me the square root of 10, on the diagonal. And that's why I call it the root triangle, because when I do the calculations, the triangle which is generated, I have 10 on the hypotenuse, and this is a 6, 8, 10, which is equivalent to 3, 4, 5. Okay? So that's the principle of the solstice relationship and equinox solstice relationships at Karnak. here's the plan of the Kerr-Mario alignments with the 3, 4, 5 and the different angles. Okay, and this is the whole thing with the triple square that you see at the first part and the 3, 4, 5 triangle at Kerr-Mario, and that gives you the geometry of the whole site. Okay, this is going very fast. Of course, all this is in the book, which is on sale, Karnak, the alignments, in the bookshop, if you need more time to study it, which I should imagine you would. Now, what I'm going to do now, I've done this all very fast because this was in my talk. I did this talk in 2011 here where I showed all this stuff already. And what I want to do now is show you how this key, all this geometry is a key to
what's up, Christy?
Other sites all around the world. Once you've understood this,
let me give me a minute or two. Give me a minute or two. I gotta let my muscles relax. I'm like pushing them like really beyond their limits. I can semi-flex.
They're all linked, megalithic, or pyramids, or ziggurats, or whatever you want. They are all linked to latitude. All these sites are placed at specific latitudes linked to
my arms are
specific
so
kind of geometry. This might sound
supple.
like
I increased the weights today.
But
So
in the next,
one second,
how long have I got left? Half
welcome,
an hour,
welcome.
maybe. I'm going to try and prove it to you. So the first elements are taken from a DVD I've done called Karnak and the Pyramid Plan. Here you've got the plan of the pyramids. This is the aerial view of the pyramids. Everybody recognize this? Yeah, okay. The Great Pyramid here. And then this is the 3, 4, 5 pyramid, what's called the Kefren Pyramid. And what you see is that leading up to this pyramid, there's a causeway here. This is a fantastic piece of engineering, this causeway. It's called the Kefren Causeway. These images this is perfectly north-south orientated. What I'm showing you here, as you can see, the pyramids themselves are perfectly north-south orientated. But this causeway gives a specific angle.
Yeah, my arms are way too like supple to like really flex, but like.
Hang on.
No,
I'm not telling you the angle
it's
yet.
way too supple, you know what I mean? Where you like, you don't want to flex them when you work them out so much, you know?
It's been made to be perfectly straight and flat.
Welcome.
Well, flat, you know, it's sloping, but it's perfectly flat. It's not, you know, it's not going up and down. And so a lot of stone was quarried and moved and positioned to make this happen. You know, thousands of tons, it's a lot of work. And at the bottom it slopes down and goes inside the valley temple. The angle actually continues right to the back of the valley temple. Here's a sketch of it, and this is the valley temple, and this angle goes all the way down straight and then continues in a path right to the back wall here. Now, I can't go into all the details of that this morning. I'm just going to talk about the angles because the measurements here are incredibly interesting. I unfortunately can't go into them. So here's an aerial view. Thanks to Robert Temple for this. Here's an aerial view of this line. This is the Kefren Funeral Temple, which is at the top. It's called the Kefren Funeral Temple. That's what it's called. It's just at the base of the pyramid.
I'm gonna try the fly. I'm gonna try the fly with the 50s. I was usually doing the 30 before. I'll try the 50.
It goes into the temple a little bit here, but then the causeway starts here and goes down to the valley temple. Here it is on close up on satellite photograph. And here's the valley temple, and
no,
you can
I'm
see
not gonna do
here
the flies. I'm not gonna do the flies with the 50s today. It's too much still.
Into the valley temple and right
especially after what I've been doing today.
Against the wall like that.
Maybe.
There it is on aerial photograph, same thing. Now what we're going to do is look at the angle of this. The angle with respect to north is 284.04
No, it's too much. I don't.
degrees.
I have the computer right here too.
Line.
Maybe if I move the computer.
Now if you take the tangent of that, it's 1
no, I'm
by
not gonna force
4.
it.
If you do it from the east-west, it's 14.0.
I'd rather do more bench press than risk silly flies, you know?
It goes up by 14.04
I'll do flies with 30s.
degrees, which is the exact angle of 1 square by 4. Okay, so you have 4 squares, a quadruple square. There you go. 1 by 4. A quadruple square perfectly placed on cardinal directions. So here you have 1 and 4 and the square root of 17 on the diagonal. Now, if we do the same thing in Karnak, in other words, I draw an east-west line and then I slope a quadruple square with its diagonal on the east-west line, that's going to give me the same kind of situation I was showing you in Karnak. Now, let's look at the solstice angle at the Gyges Plateau. This is the, what's this called? Archaeogeodesy. This is a program that gives you the exact angles done by James Q. Jacobs and Victor Rice. Gives you the exact angle at any date anywhere on the planet.
Oh, I got my chair right here with the computer on it. I need to set up my room better because I got put something else on this table. So.
The Great Pyramid in the year 3200 BC, which is the date given by Robert Temple from his thermoluminescent test of the stones in the Great Pyramid. He got a value of 3200 BC. But if I take that as a date, I get this angle here for the solstice, 28.072, which is the exact double of the quadruple square. So we get exactly the same principle here at the Gyges Plateau as at Karnak, and this can only happen at the latitude of the Gyges Plateau, okay? You've got a quadruple square, gives you the east-west, one diagonal gives you equinox, and the other diagonal, solstice. And so if you look at that with respect to the Kepler causeway, you see the solstice angle there, well, that's what you get. In fact, if you stand, you get the sun setting between the head of this, behind the head of the Sphinx, between the two pyramids, at summer solstice sunset. So what's the geometry link to this? It's the same thing. Then we come back to the root triangle thing. 1 by 4. You put this into, with the root 17, you put it into the calculations, it doubles the angle, and you get a Pythagoras triangle, the 8, 15, 17. So it's the 8, 15, 17 Pythagoras triangle that actually gives you the angle of solstice at the Gyges Plateau. Okay?
Yo, Dick!
So this is
probation over.
Principle. So let's go.
Oh, I understand. Are you serious? They wouldn't give you the shoes to start? Are you
Same name
serious?
as Karnak in
Are
Brittany,
you serious?
of
They didn't
course.
give you the shoe allowance.
This is the
No
temple
stocks.
known as
Hey
the
man, me
temple
neither, dude.
of, how do you pronounce that in English? Amun-Ra? Amun-Ra
Yo, I learned
in
about the
Karnak.
stocks. I learned
This is the
how
hieroglyph.
rich people like Jeff Bezos get rich. They take a loan because you're not taxed on taking a loan. So they take a loan, but they have such large leverage in the interest rates because of how much wealth they have. So they pay like 4% loan instead of paying like 25% income tax or something. No uniform or shoes until probation was over. No shoes? What are you?
That's wrong.
That's crazy, man.
The diagonal of the temple.
That doesn't make any sense.
The temple is in two parts, but if we take the diagonal here, you see this part.
Yo,
this
speaking
part.
of
If you take the diagonal of this part or this
about
part,
$275, not exactly, but
east-west.
nearly that. Let me show you,
Okay,
buddy.
and it corresponds to the double square. All my geometry has gone off here. These should be two double squares side by side. I don't know what's happened.
Oh
Something's gone wrong. But oh yeah, that's a pity. The diagonal of this double square gives you a 3, 4, 5 triangle. Here's the angle of the diagonal of the temple.
I did
You
it,
can
man.
actually see the geometry's wrong, but
I
you
did
can
the
see
thing.
the diagonal going from one corner
Thanks,
to the other
buddy.
here, and that's the angle. It's our 53.13 degrees, but this is taken
Fuck,
from
man.
north. 320.
They're the same ones, sick, man. They're good. They're ergonomic, man. And when I do the bicycle, I go up to my face and like I don't hit myself in the face anymore.
3, 4, 5 triangle. Okay, and it happens to have seems to have units of measurement in meters, because we have 200 meters.
Yo, thanks, buddy. Thanks for being here, man. The same ones you have, nice. Yo, thank you for following me, Fragilities. I appreciate that very much.
If you see here,
you can lurk if you want. I have an anonymous follower mode. All right, let's do reps of 10. Yo, I put the 40 pounds onto the bar now.
You take 90 from that. This is a double
That's sick, dude. I put the 40 pounds onto the bar. I'm just doing a single rep. Canadian employees, that'd be sick, dude. That's how we get rich, man. Take the loan on the stock market values, and you don't pay tax on the stocks, right? So the stocks you don't pay tax, and if you take a loan on your salary, you don't pay tax. In the United States, I don't know about Canada.
It's gone up by about its own size on the horizon.
Okay, here we go. I'm also just doing one rep for the 205 because I feel like I can't even do. I tried to do two. I did do two before stream, but I almost. What's the word? I almost couldn't do it. TFSA, tax-free saving account. Nice, buddy. You're so knowledgeable, man. Do inform me, homie. Please.
They're all built with exactly the same principle. The latitude was chosen for that particular principle.
We'll put this here.
Okay, these are the Google Earth axes. Okay, now I'm going to change in this. What I'm going to talk about now is in another DVD called How the Ancients Located Their Sacred Site. We're going to go to Baalbek. You've probably heard of Baalbek, a place where there are incredible blocks of stones, some of them over 1,000 tons in weight, and you can see them here at the base of the temple. There's a man sitting there, you can see him here, and the size of these blocks, that goes up to here, this one. You know, we're up to about 1,000 tons, and these are the foundations of the temple. Officially, the Romans did this, but of course, nobody really believes that. You know, but that's what they say. But you know, this.
I gotta rechange my thing. Yo, Barra, RN Barra, buddy. What's up, man? How you doing, buddy?
So this is very interesting. The Romans seem to have built on top of this platform, which is an incredible
100K contribution cap, but you don't pay tax on capital gains.
Here you can see these pillars built 100K. On top of it.
Wow.
Now, what's interesting?
Are we gonna have it again? Yo, thanks, Dick. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for inspiring me and telling me to get the weights too, man. Same with you, Barra.
Exactly the
Thanks for inspiring me, buddy.
14.0.
The chest and tries today? Nice.
Exactly the angle of a quadruple
nice,
square.
dude. That's sick.
Placed with its diagonal placed on the cardinal direction, on east-west. Its diagonal placed on east-west. There'd be really a lot to say about this again. But I can't go into it now.
Yo, that's sick, man. That's awesome, buddy.
But if you're interested,
there you go. That's a little better.
DVD. So again, we found the same geometry at the Gyges plateau. The full quadruple square with its
thanks for being here, bro.
Diagonal on the east-west line. So it's the same angle as the Kefren Causeway. So these stones at Baalbek have been orientated exactly the same angle as the Kefren Causeway on the Gyges plateau. Okay. Now I'm going to go to another spot, the Ziggurat of have we got the time anywhere? Do you know what time it is? 1:45, thank you. I'm going to show a very interesting shape now called the 2x3 square. Not very complicated. It's 2 on one side and 3 on the other. It gives again a diagonal of root 17. Which is the same diagonal as the
600 plus calories. That's sick, buddy.
It's the same diagonal length, the square root of 17. Okay, and here I'll put the angles. These are the two angles. If you trace the diagonal of the 2x3 rectangle, you get these two angles. Okay, the larger one, 56.31, and the smaller one, 33.69. So that's the sort of introduction. Oh, yeah, and if you generate, if you use that as the root triangle, and then you generate the Pythagoras triangle, from that, according to the what I showed you, this generates the 5, 12, 13 triangle. So the 2 by 3 rectangle generates the 5, 12, 13 triangle with a double angle. 33.69 doubled gives you 67.38. So that's the basic geometry of this shape here.
I'm watching from my 70-inch TV through. Sick, buddy. Sick, buddy.
Let's go here. This is the ziggurat in Ur, built by Namu around 2100 BC. Ur was the biggest town on earth at that time, they reckon. About 67,000 people lived there. Well, 67,246 lived there. And we don't want to forget anybody. And this was the last thing built by the native Sumerian rulers. Okay? So that's very interesting. This is how it looked when it was found, in the 19th century, or when it was photographed in the 19th century. And it's been done, they've redone the stairs. 3 staircases of 100 steps lead up to a platform. Here's a kind of drawing of it. Very interesting, sophisticated.
That's about it. Thanks for being here, man.
And here's the north-orientated satellite image of the ziggurat. Now, if we measure the southern side of it, just the measurements, we get 38 meters. This is approximate. I'm not saying this is exactly 38 meters, but this is, the measurement that you get if you measure this side of it. And if you measure,
I'm right at that limit, though.
Meters,
I know I'm good. That's why I'm doing it. But like,
here,
I know I'm like right at that limit.
That's exactly what you can see being measured by the yellow line. Okay, 57 meters. You get a relationship 38 to 57 meters. 38 divided by 2 equals 19. 19 times 3, 57. This is a 2 by 3 rectangle. Okay? So the ziggurat is a 2 by 3 rectangle. But it's not positioned on the cardinal directions, not like the pyramids. It's not positioned on the cardinal directions, but if we look at the angle of its southern side, we get an angle. This is from north at 236.31, which gives us 33.69 degrees, which is the angle of a 2 by 3 rectangle. So it's a 2 by 3 rectangle which has been turned according to the angle of a 2 by 3 rectangle. So what does that mean? It means that one of the diagonals is north-south, which happens to be the case. You can see it here, 180 degrees. That's the
So the flies, I'm still doing 30 pounds.
Perfectly north-south. So quite clearly, this 2 by 3 geometry has been clearly intentionally used here. Let's look at the position of the moon. Why am I looking at the moon? Because the Ur ziggurat is dedicated to the moon. We know about this. We have writing about it, and the temple at the top was dedicated to the moon. So this is very interesting. So let's see what the moon's doing here. I can't get into the 18.6 year moon cycle in detail here, but the moon has extreme positions. I hope most of you have heard about it. The moon has extreme positions where it goes up to an angle from east-west which is greater than the solstice angle. It goes further north at some points over an 18.6 year cycle. That's called the major moon angle. And if we look at the major moon angle at the latitude of the ziggurat of Ur in 2100 BC, which is the date that this was built, 34.041 degrees. Now, this angle here is given as the first bit of the moon that comes up over the horizon. But I'm quite convinced that the angle that was taken was the angle of the moon sitting on the horizon.
Just came to say hi, get ready for dinners, buddy. Yo, thanks for being here, buddy. Congrats on your workout, man. That's great,
it
dude.
might be, when the moon is at its maximum, it might be a crescent moon. There's no
dude.
reason it should be a full moon. And so, if you want to get an exact angle, then you can't take the top of the moon, you have to take the bottom of the moon when it's sitting on the horizon. And so, if you do that at this latitude with the moon angle, you get an angle of 33.7 degrees for the moon sitting on the horizon, okay? Now, as I said, the city of Ur's patron deity was Nana, the Sumerian moon god, and the name of the city literally means the abode of Nana, which is the abode of the moon, okay? So, this is a big clue. So if we look at this, we then discover then that the major northern moonrise at this latitude in 2000 BC was exactly on the slope of 2/3, which meant you would get that. Okay, if you were standing on the top of the ziggurat, then you get the staircase and the full moon coming up over the horizon, sitting on the horizon exactly on the axis, in the axis of that major staircase. That happens once every 18.6 years. So that's the geometry of the 2/3 rectangle. But what's interesting is that if you take the other diagonal gives you an angle of 292.62 degrees, or 22.62 east-west, or 63.38 from the north. It's the angle of the 5, 12, 13 triangles. So you have one of the diagonals is north-south, and the other one is exactly the angle of a 5, 12, 13 triangle, Pythagoras triangle, taken from the north, south, east, west, placed on the cardinal directions. So you can do that. Put a 5, 12, 13 triangle along the other diagonal. Now if we look at the minor moon now, because the moon has an extreme north position, a major position, a minor position. If we look at the minor position here, on this table, 112.49 degrees, we now discover that the minor moon sets at the angle of a 5, 12, 13 triangle. Okay? So, when the minor moon rises, it sets, so the major moon, as we've seen, is in the major axis, and the minor moon sets along the other diagonal. Can you believe this? Just happens to be true. Okay, and this gives a relationship. I found this very interesting. This gives a relationship because I've got a 2:3 ratio for the major moon and a 5:12 relationship for the minor moon. This gives me a relationship of distance for the major moon and the minor moon of 5:8, which are two numbers in the Fibonacci series. Okay, so that's a very interesting fact linked to this latitude. So that's a geometry you could put on the ziggurat. But all I'm going to show you now is just absolutely unbelievable. I'd like now to put on your seat belts. And what have I done here? Hang on a second. I hope this is going to work. Yes. Now watch what happens here. I'm going to put a point. Well, first of all, I'm going to show to you that the north-south, this is Google Earth video. I'm going to show to you that the north-south, as you can see, 180 degrees here. Okay? That's the north-south diagonal, 180. But now I'm going to go along the other diagonal. I'm going to put a point on that corner. And what we're going to do here, first of all, you can see it's 292, right? We're at the angle of the 5, 12, 13. But what I'm going to do is take this line, and I'm going to extend it. I'm going to extend it quite a long way. I'm going to extend it 989 kilometers, right? That's a very long way. We're going to go right across Iraq and Syria This is the beauty of Google Earth. And we're going to zoom in here near Lebanon. The place names are in French, but we'll zoom in here to a place called Baalbek, where we were a little earlier. So, let's zoom in. Here's the town of Baalbek. There's the temple up here in the north. There's the temple. And there's another temple here. There's an angle. Down here are the massive recumbent stones of Baalbek. And the temple's up there. And there's this temple here, which is midway between the two, and which gives an angle. Look at that angle. 292.62 degrees. It's the exact angle to 1/100th of a degree of a 5, 12, 13 triangle. So if you zoom back into, from that line, you zoom back into the ziggurat of Earth, you see that that line goes right along that diagonal. Okay? You taking this in? Yeah, what were the ancients up to? Is that the slogan of megalithomania? Hang on. Can I close this off? Oh dear. Hang on. Maybe I can leave that turning and come back to it this way. That's okay. So that's the resume of that. The distance happens to be exactly 32,000 arc seconds. Right. Now to finish this off, I must have about 5 minutes left, I'd like to say something about Stonehenge. So, we were at Stonehenge yesterday, and what's very interesting about Stonehenge is that the latitude of Stonehenge gives an exact right angle between the summer solstice and the major moon, or the solstices and the major moon. So if you take the major solstice angle, which we saw yesterday goes to the altar stone, goes down that major axis, and you take the moon angle, the major moon angle towards the south, that creates a right angle, and that will only happen at the latitude of Stonehenge. You won't get a right angle anywhere else. Okay? Now, if you go further north or further south, you haven't got a right angle. It's only
so
happens
good.
at the latitude of Stonehenge.
I feel so
Now,
good.
That's a very interesting point.
I feel just
especially
so
since
good.
I'm very much into right angles, because I'm working with 3, 4, 5 triangles, or Pythagorean triangles, which have right angles. Okay? And you use Pythagorean triangles to get right angles. That's how you do it. And if we take the station stones, so there are 2 remaining stones. The oldest stones at Stonehenge, as far as we know, are the station stones. 4 stones which were erected on the Aubrey Circle. They weren't in the holes of the Aubrey Circle, which are the 56 holes in a circle, which are the oldest part of Stonehenge. And there were 4 standing stones there, which seem to have been erected around 3000 BC. And those 4 standing stones are positioned in a certain way. There's been a lot of talk about this. A lot of people suggest it's a 5, 12, 13 triangle. And even Richard Atkinson conceded that it was very, very, very close. They were positioned to being very, very close to a 5, 12, 13 triangle. And here are the angles given by John North in his book on Stonehenge, all the different angles. And we can see that if you add the angles together, now, I've got something come out that shouldn't have done here. Doesn't matter, let's talk about it. If I add these 2 angles together and take them away from 90 degrees, I get the angle between these 2 station stones. So the station stones are here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and Stonehenge is in the middle. And so this diagonal between these 2 station stones from north is the diagonal of a triple square. All right? this is news, right? Nobody knows about this. Okay? So that's the diagonal of a triple square. Now if you take the other two standing stones, the other two station stones, and you take their angle, that's a double square. So here's the geometry of those station stones. There's a triple square and a double square, which create a 5, 12, 13 between them. And that 5, 12, 13, its sides give solstice and major moon. Now there's another place a bit further away called Woodhenge. I'm going to finish on this. A Woodhenge Centre. These are concentric ovals, okay? They've been filled in with concrete. Maybe you know them. These are post holes in the chalk. So we've got very precise positions and measurements. And you can work out the exact centre of Woodhenge. Okay, and if you take it, they're oval, so you have a long axis and a short axis. So you get the major moonrise and solstice angles in the same way here, shown by the ellipse. Now what I'm going to do now is show you the relationship between the exact centre of the Aubrey circle, so where the station stones are, these 56 holes. This is the oldest circle traced at Stonehenge. If you take the exact centre and you link that to the centre of Woodhenge. Is this going to come up? Hope so. Yes, here it is. So here I'm showing here the station stones, and these are the Aubrey holes. This is another station stone. So that's the Aubrey circle, and the exact centre of the Aubrey circle is here. So if we put a point on that exact centre, and now we head for Woodhenge, which is over 3 kilometres away. I'm talking kilometres, I live in France and all. We go right to the centre of the Woodhenge monument here. It's to the exact centre. Okay? And look at the angle. That angle is 67.38 degrees. That is the exact angle to 1/100th of a degree precision of a 5, 12, 13 triangle. The same triangle we just saw linked the ziggurat of Ur. Look, let's get the calculator out here, just to show you. If I divide 12 divided by 5 for a 5, 12, 13, that gives me that. Take the inverse tangent, 67.38 degrees. Look at the angle on the map, 67.38 degrees. It is exact, okay? So again here, in 3000 BC, we're not talking about sort of amateurs, sort of vaguely looking at the horizon to link things up. These people the people who did this must have had incredibly precise methods to position exactly over a 3-kilometer distance the 5, 12, 13 triangle with a precision of 1/100th of a degree to cardinal directions. And that's what's interesting is then that gives you a kind of plan for the whole of the Stonehenge area, because you get the grid going from Stonehenge to Woodhenge as a 5, 12, 13, and this means that from Woodhenge down the Cursus is a 2 by 18. The two station stones that give you the double square here gives you a 3 by 6 point, which comes to a spot here. So this is a suggestion of a geometrical organisation of the Stonehenge area. And my time's up. So I hope you managed to follow all that. And thank you very much.
Wow, that was an hour long. Sweet.
don't know if you know about
I'm working up for an hour. That's crazy.
This is the title, and also a brilliant illustration by my brother Emmanuel of what we're looking at today, and it's called The Geomancy of the Giants, or Giant Geomancers. And we're looking really at the British Isles here. Now, previously, I'd written a book with Jim Vieira, Giants on Record, about the American giant story, actual skeletons, legends, academic record accounts that there were actually giants existing in prehistoric times. Now, also in Britain, this is the case, and we're not just, when we research this, we're not just looking for evidence of giant skeletons. That's just one aspect of it. What fascinates me more is the fact that many of these giant myths, and also these are locations where these bones are found, are often actually related to how they worked with the landscape, how they worked with alignments, astronomy, metrology, ancient measurement systems, and other such things. And this book on the right is a classic book written by the brilliant Anthony Roberts back in 1978 called Sowers of Thunder, which looks at the whole mythos of giants in the landscape perspective, looking at the geomancy. And it really is an amazing book if you can get a copy of it. And we're basing our new book, The Giants of Stonehenge and Ancient Britain, partly on Anthony's research, so big respect to him. He died in 1990, actually on top of Glastonbury Tour. I know Andrew and other people knew him, and he was a contemporary with John Michel. But he was really the first person to put it out there, and that these stories of giants have some meaning to them. They're not just fantasy, they're not just folklore, they're not just, stories passed down from generation. There's much more knowledge and wisdom and science even encoded within this. And this research I've been doing for this new book, which is going to come out at some point early next year, really kind of goes full circle back to the research I've been doing for a long time, which is looking at the alignments in the landscape, the ley lines, the geomancy, earth grids, and other such things, partly based on the book I wrote way back in 2008 called Earth Grids. But there's many aspects that kind of come up in this research, whether you're looking at giant lore or not. These are the things we really have to look at. Obviously there's classic geomancy, which translates as divination of the earth. Geodesy, which is division of the earth. And archaeogeodesy, which is all about the ancient place determination, bringing in different factors, really relating to ancient sites. Obviously, geometry and sacred geometry come into this, and we find Pythagorean triangles marking the entire landscape around Britain. Obviously, we have ley lines and the extension of ley lines, which are great earth circles, which divide the earth in two, and archaeoastronomy, which is all linked with this. And then we even have kind of legends and stories this is often when dragons come into the picture, especially here in Britain, of earth energy lines and telluric currents. And really, when you get into these myths and these stories, and you go deep into the old records and you find the original sources of where these were written down, we do find that they're encoding very high knowledge about how they worked the landscape. In tradition, giants thrived in high places, up on hilltops. They created these hill forts. We have this picture at the top showing giants moving stones around. We also have the classic story of Gog Magog being defeated by Brutus and thrown off the cliffs on the south coast. And we actually see an image of that here. But interestingly, some of the stories relate to Gog Magog of that he was connected. He was basically said he was so strong he could uproot an oak tree and shake it like a hazel wand. Now, this is really intriguing because this hazel wand is an old form of divination. It's an old form of the way they use certain types of rods made of hazel to divine the land. So the fact we're finding these little clues within these ancient texts, to me, is fascinating. We'll find that more as we go through the talk. Interestingly, where he was thrown off the cliff, in some traditions, it was called Deadman's Point, or in another version, Dodman's Point. And if you're into the lay hunter kind of movement, the whole idea of Dodman is a surveyor of the ancient land, and we find this potentially represented in the Long Man of Wilmington down in Sussex. In Cornwall, we have many, many different accounts of these stone-throwing, earth-moving giants who worked with the landscape and had all these battles, throwing hammers and dropping stones from their apron and other such things, and creating these ancient sites. Perhaps the most famous is the story of St. Michael's Mount. And Cormoran, who was a famous giant, who was said to be 18 feet tall. And some traditions have that translated as giant of the sea, or Cal Mortan. And him and his wife lived on this mount, and he would get her to do a bulk of the work by carrying stones in an apron. And this is a thing we're going to get into a little bit later, and JJ is going to talk more about this, about the importance of what this apron represents. And they were said, these giants and his wife were said to have walked from shore to shore, moving stones, massive stones around, and they would throw hammers to each other, they would drop stones from the apron, and so on and so forth. But even at St. Michael's Mount, where we have all these legends, an actual giant skeleton was unearthed, which was over 8 feet tall a few hundred years ago. And we're going to feature this in this book, and this is what this account actually comes from. So this is the start of this idea where we're finding these giant burials either placed there because it marked where a mythos was encoded in the land, or the mythos emerged from the fact that these giants were found there. So there's a lot going on here. We also have these very interesting alignments, the St. Michael line going all the way across southern England. We're just seeing the Cornwall of French section here. And then the Apollo current, or the St. Michael European axis that goes down through Europe. And interestingly, there's many sites along these. Even Mont Saint-Michel has this as well. All along both of these lines, we have these giant legends and stories of stone moving and earth moving and so on and so forth. Cambrai in Cornwall is an interesting example. A tower's over red roof, and this has got, people say there's Inca-style terracing and cyclopean walls up there. And according to legend, the giant John, he was called, would often throw boulders at neighboring giants, and they would throw them back to each other. This is why the hillside is covered in rocks. And it's also said to be the meeting place of local Titan leaders, local giant rulers. And they would actually have gatherings there, and they would have battles. They would throw stones to each other, like games of quoits, they're called in some traditions. But to me, this harks back to an era where these great people who were building these megalithic sites would actually get together and plan their work in the landscape. The giant's bolster is another one, and the whole story of St. Agnes. And still today, there are parades of these giant effigies around certain areas of Cornwall. Bolster was said to have walked from two several miles distant in one step. St. Agnes Beacon to another tin mining area and other parts of the landscape. And this is just actually a map from John Michel's classic book on Cornwall that came out in the early 70s. And even at Boscawen Un Stone Circle, not only do we have the classic stone circle and many astronomical alignments and ley lines coming out from it, and there's stories of giants walking from the Scilly Isles across the land to this area. And interestingly, there's actually what is called the giant's footprint in a stone nearby to that, which is said to be where he placed his foot as he was stepping across the landscape, forming these ley lines. And so the stories go on and on and on. I could give you 100 and maybe 150 stories that we're going to feature in the book, talking about this and the way that this myth coincides with what has been discovered already in the landscape. We have more here, obviously. Again, this is to do with Cormoran, who lived on St. Michael's Mount. And this is an interesting one. because, again, he was the lord of the seamount. The two giants assisted each other in the endless reshaping of the landscape, and they threw boulders to one another as recreation on Trencrom Hill. And this is to explain why so many stones are lying around there. But in one version, they only had one large hammer to do their megalithic work. And because of this, they would throw it to each other over and over again. And unfortunately, his wife got hit by the hammer one day and pretty much died. And so this is, again, another representation of how the landscape is represented. We even have the same kind of story here in London. We have hammer-throwing giantesses in Putney and Fulham. This is really intriguing. Back in 1787, in Gross's Provincial Glossary, he describes how they used this hammer to build the churches of Fulham and also in Putney on either side of the river. When they threw it to one another, they would respectfully yell, "Put it nigh and heave it full home," where the names Putney and Fulham were derived from, apparently. So here's an image of my nephew looking absolutely fascinated to be at this stone on his phone. This is my nephew Joe. But this is another interesting account. This is like from the Birmingham area. This is the Gilbert stone. And it said that Gilbert carried this stone and he deposited it at a mysterious angle to change the boundary to his own advantage. And that is what the legend states. So within just the basic kind of information board at this particular stone, this is what it says. So he's creating and placing stones for specific angles and creations of geomancy, really, in the landscape. We have Wansdyke and also Maze Knoll that were created by the giant builder called Gorm. And he used to travel along straight lines with a shovelful of earth on his shoulder. And one day he stumbled in the Avon Valley and created the prehistoric hill fort Maze Knoll. And then he kind of dragged his shovel accidentally through the earth and created the longest dike in Britain, which stretches for 80 miles from the Avon Valley all the way to Andover in Hampshire. And so we have other stories that continue of him dropping and falling in the sea and creating islands and other such things. The Wrekin as well is a remarkably large earthwork, similar themes attached to it like the Gorm mythos, with a persistent legend that some local giants were involved in its construction. We have the similar thing down near Leicester, the Mount Sorrel. You may have heard this. This is actually in the introduction by Paul Devereux of Sowers of Thunder. And this is interesting because the giant bell, and this is like Celtic connotations, Belinus and so forth, who was supposed to be the ancient king who created straight roads with Molmutius, of course. And he took 3 prodigious leaps, beginning on Mount Sorrel. He leapt 1 mile to a place called One Leap, which is now called One Lip, and eventually to Birstall, where apparently he burst, and that's where the name came from, and his horse burst and it killed them. And then the final leap properly killed them, and this has become known as Belgrave, or Bell's Grave, where he was supposed to be buried. So even within the basic landscape of various hills in Leicester, we have this legend, which is encoding straight line alignments. And to me, this is utterly fascinating that everything seems to come back to this giant mythos. Even in London with the London Stone, it was said to have been brought to the area by Brutus with the giant Gog Magog, who he caught and brought back to London. And the saying goes, so long as the stone of Brutus is safe, London will flourish. There was even a giant bone, a thigh bone, was on display at Mary Wool Church nearby for many, many years. And the stone itself used to be 6 feet high up until the 1700s. And it is said to be the place where all distances from London were measured, suggesting a use of surveying ancient times, something clearly these so-called giants were adepts of. And even at Tower Hill, we have stories of giants, Bran. We have the giant suit of armour, which is there on the other end of this famous ley line. St Paul's Cathedral is said to be a stone circle under there, according to some traditions. And again, we have this straight line alignment. Rombord of Ilkley Moor, again, there's actually a statue of him in a local shopping centre. He was said to have moved through the landscape, and he was hotly pursued by his giant wife, who dropped an apron full of stones at various locations along the route and created stone circle and some of these carved stones along the way. But one of the themes is obviously the title of Anthony Roberts' book. This is a brilliant picture I found on the internet. Sorry. Appears to be some kind of giant kind of lightning monster, but it's a good representation of sowers of thunder, that these ancient giants, not only were they marking things in the landscape by moving stones and earth, they were actually controlling the weather. They were like master shamans or sorcerers. They had power over the stones, the land, and they could pretty much do anything, the weather. We have many stories. This is kind of the sowers of thunder. The story really is that if you disturb a giant's grave, even nowadays, great thunder and lightning will occur. This has happened on many occasions and has been recorded. We have an entire chapter devoted to this, suggesting they could put curses on graves like Tutankhamun could in ancient Egypt. We obviously have the Long Man of Wilmington. This is some idea of Alfred Watkins that this is the Dod Man. But here we have legends before this describing two giants who lived on the two
Thank you for
hills,
watching.
Windover Hill, where the Long Man
Start
is.
lifting weights. You'll feel amazing. I
They
feel
were thrown
amazing
earth and
today. I feel
boulders to
amazing
each
right
other,
now.
and they got agitated. They started fighting. And after
I feel
a
amazing.
long battle, the Windover Hill giant
I love
was
lifting
defeated,
weights.
and it said that the local people.
I love streaming. I love streaming my workouts.
Outline around his body, and this is what's left there. But he's
I'm so
holding
happy.
these two staffs, which
I'm
are
so
believed to
happy.
be surveyor's staffs.
Alright, thank you for watching. I'm
And
going
even from
to
there, we
sign
have
off
multiple
now.
ley lines
I
going
gotta sign off.
through
Gotta go.
this
Thank you for being here.
particular area. There's even stories of phantom black dogs, which are also associated often with these straight lines. We have in Hertfordshire the lost thigh bone of Jacko Legs. This is interesting.
Who are we gonna
This is
read?
two
Who are we
blocks
gonna
of stone,
read?
14 feet
Are we gonna
apart,
read someone?
buried
Yeah,
in
let's
this
read
particular graveyard.
Maybe.
This talks about how when he got caught because he was a thief or something like this, he fired an arrow over a specific
Dynamics?
distance. It landed in a certain spot in a dead straight line, and that's where he would be buried. And they would often choose. And again, we're talking about straight
Sure, let's
line
read
alignments.
dynamics. Why
There's
not?
a similar arrow mythos thing here at a place called Brent Pelham in Essex. There was Piers Shonks, was a so-called 23-foot tall giant who existed. And again, to escape this big elaborate story, we're going to go into this in the book, and there's lots of megaliths here just around this church, suggesting this was a megalithic site. This is also the location of part of the Nuthamstead Zodiac, which is like
Right.
a landscape zodiac found
Thanks for being here. You're the
in
best.
this part of kind of
You
North
rule. You all
Essex,
rule. Thank you for
going
being here.
into
Really appreciate it.
which various people
Flex
have
time.
written about. And he was going to be taken away by the devil for all the deeds.
Start
he
lifting
was
weights.
doing.
You'll feel good. You feel
But,
good.
and
I
the
swear.
devil said, I will keep you
Alright,
if
bye.
you're
Talk to you
not
soon.
in the church, and I will keep your soul if you buried outside the church. So he fired the arrow into the wall of the church and was buried there. So he defeated the devil and his soul was free. But this is a story and it goes into great detail. I'm not going to do it all here. Of a 23-foot giant with all this mythos, again firing arrows in straight lines. Tom Hickathrift as well in Suffolk. He was called the Giant of the Marshes. Similar stories associated with him. He famously battled the giant at Wisbeach. He was said to live in various parts of Norfolk and Suffolk. He's depicted on pub signs and local town signs in the area. And one of the stories is that he'd be throwing massive hammer great distances when he was doing his build